Last week, we discussed an uncomfortable but important question. Are smartphones and social media actually making our lives better? There's no denying that these tiny devices come with significant benefits, ranging from communication to access to information to entertainment. But they come at a price. Monetarily, of course, but the heaviest price seems to be on our mental health, and in particular, the mental health and happiness of young people. Rates of depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and self-harm all up by a lot, okay? Since the introduction of smartphones and a specific type of social media in 2010, much of which has been detailed in the excellent book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And while it's tempting to view the past through rose-colored lenses and reimagine a golden age in which children laughed freely and played outside, a childhood based on play as opposed to phones, the genie is out of the bottle. The box of Pandora has been opened. And unless I'm missing something, these technologies, they're here to stay. But is that it? Is it really an all or none situation? Accept all of the technology part and parcel or live your life as a Luddite? Or is there another way? Is there a way to live with smartphones and social media, but to do so with balance, without them consuming our children and destroying our very way of life? Of course there is. So with that, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Unconditional with Norbie Schickel. We've got an exciting episode today, and I'll confess, this was a bit of an unplanned episode. Okay? After completing last week's episode on smartphones and social media, I realized that there were a few aspects of the conversation that I really wanted to go a bit deeper on. And rather than turn that discussion into a 2.5-hour episode, I just figured we'd hit a couple of these topics this week. So if you've already listened to that episode, awesome. Welcome back. So good to have you again. If you happen to be tuning in for the first time, and or if somehow you missed last week's episode, welcome to you too. Of course, it's great to have you as well, but it is probably worth going back, maybe pause this episode, for now at least, go back and maybe give that previous episode a listen. Okay, I think you'll really enjoy it. But today, I want to go a bit deeper into solutions to this challenge of smartphones and social media. Last week, we did talk about this, but we talked in broad strokes. We discussed that the 1-2 combo, this rise in safetyism in the real world, while at the same time, the virtual world becoming more enticing, more addictive, and more dangerous, with harms ranging from the mere crowding out of non-phone experiences to the threat of child predators, serious mental disorders, and even self-harm and suicide. We also discussed what I described as the antidote, okay, the antidote, if you will, as presented by Jonathan Haidt, which in short is to embrace and allow risk and excitement and adventure in the real world, while setting some very common sense limits on the use of these technologies, particularly for young people during some very critical stages of development. And of course, I added my own 2 cents, right? What stands out to me as maybe equally as important to piece this puzzle together, which is not only to merely audit our own phone habits and social media use as adults, as parents, and as role models, but also critically to embrace and accept the call to real-world adventure and excitement in our own lives. As anyone who's been around children will tell you, it's not about what you say. It's about what they see. Now, if you're listening to this episode, certainly if you've listened to the previous episode, or if you've read The Anxious Generation, which I know many of you have. And if you have, of course, absolute gold star for you. Excellent book. I plugged it hard in the last episode. I'm going to plug it right now. If you haven't read The Anxious Generation, definitely grab yourself a copy. Get 2 copies, as I like to say, right? You read one, give one to a friend. Well worth the price. Very glad to see some of the numbers on this book. I think last I checked, it was one of the top sellers on Amazon in a couple different categories. So very encouraging. Okay. Really warms my heart to see that. But I'm going to assume here that if you're in this camp, You probably already agree in principle with a lot of what I said in the prior episode and what I'm going to highlight in this episode. But what does it mean in practice? Many of these things are easier said than done. And Haidt, of course, outlines his perspective on solutions, both at a societal level as well as at an individual level. But what I'm going to do today is shed some additional light in terms of how I think about the nature of this challenge, both as a parent as well as someone who's just intent on discovering and living my own personal best life. Offer up some of the things that have worked for our family, for me, as we attempt to navigate this new and unfamiliar world. Now, I use those words deliberately, new and unfamiliar, because when you think about it, it is. In fact, there is something very unique and a little disturbing about the time period that we're living in. And that is, in about the last 100 years or so, humanity has entered an age in which the adult world of our children and of our grandchildren will almost certainly look very different than the world of today. And that's not a trivial thing. Okay, that is a profound shift. And I'm sorry to say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Consider the world of a traditional hunter-gatherer, a farmer, or a blacksmith. The world that their children and grandchildren, when they grow up, it's going to look pretty much the same as the world of their parents and grandparents. How to track an animal, how to identify plants which are edible and life-sustaining, and which ones are to be avoided. How to properly harvest and store food for the winter. Knowledge, wisdom, experience, all passed from generation to generation in order to improve the chances of the next generation's survival and thriving in the real world, right? A very similar world to that of their parents and that of their grandparents. But around 100 years ago, that changed. Think of the world of your grandparents. Okay, I'm 41 years old, and my grandparents were born in a world without cars, without telephones. Okay? The world of today, in many ways, is completely unrecognizable. And because of that, many of the skills, the information, and the knowledge that they learned as children would be completely unhelpful. The career paths that their parents would have desired for them as a way to ensure a good living have likely changed. In many cases, they may even be obsolete. We are among the first generations of people who are guaranteed that the future lives of their children will look completely different than their lives of today. This is an unsettling thought. And while this can be a scary thought, unsettling for sure, I'll tell you what this means for me. It means that particularly as a parent, I'm focused much less on the specific and much more on the general. I'm focused much less on what to think and much more on how to think. Much less on outcome, much more on process. Okay, I'll dive into that, but I hope at a high level that makes sense. I'm going to give you a few examples. Just a few years ago, learning to code, becoming a software engineer, would have been an obvious choice to ensure a life of relative comfort, job stability, and employment. Now with AI, it looks like many of those jobs will just go away. So if I'd placed so much emphasis on learning the skill of coding, as opposed to the meta skill of how to learn a new skill, I've unwittingly constrained my kid. We can think of any career path of a prior generation, whether it be a lawyer, accountant, or coal miner, and see the same thing at play. So for me, and how I think about this challenge, this unique time period that we're in, whether it's from food to social media to smartphones or to AI, is I try to focus on the meta, okay, on the layer above. I try to abstract up on the how and the why as opposed to the what. And the most important meta skill in my view, the one that I almost never hear people talking, is something that people spoke and thought a lot about in the past. And that is judgment. Okay, judgment. And I'm not talking about viewing yourself as superior to other people, right? Judge not lest ye be judged and all that. We're talking discernment, sensible, one of sound judgment, We're talking old-timey notions here, okay? Comments that used to really mean a lot to people. And I'm really starting to understand and see why. So on this topic, on smartphones and on social media, what I'm really aiming for, what I should say that my wife and I are really aiming for with this subject, whether it's food, whether it's friends, life in general, is cultivating and developing this skill of sound judgment. And this is a very, very slow process. This is a process that depends on a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion as to the why, a lot of the what's really at stake here, as well as the ability to recognize from the learned and lived experiences of other people, right? Just saying, because I say so, isn't the development of sound judgment. Just saying, because it's the right thing to do, isn't the development of sound judgment. As tempting as that is as parents, particularly for young kids. And of course, this is a process which will involve some autonomy. And with autonomy comes mistakes. Something none of us look forward to, but we have to accept that that is part and parcel for developing this skill. For me, I've got young kids now, and in some ways, it is easier and it would be way cleaner to have a hard and fast rule on everything. But I know that the most challenging years are going to be the teenage years. There's just no denying that from where I'm sitting now. So if we know that that is a challenge that's coming, rather than crossing my fingers and hoping that my kids will, quote, make good choices, well, we are in essence training for that time period now. My kids are 6 and 8, so the stakes around screens and social media are fairly low, but that will change in a few years. Now, we've spoken about the importance of moving from a phone-based childhood to a play-based childhood and all the benefits that come with that. And I get the temptation to think that, well, if less time on devices is good, then none would be better. What about just saying no, right? Just say no to screens. And I think that's a mistake. And the big reason in my mind is this idea that what you resist persists. Sometimes, the more that you try to stamp something out of existence, the more it comes raging back, right? Bigger than ever, right? If you think of the Streisand effect, right? For those who are not familiar with it, I think it was like a couple people posted Barbra Streisand's house online, and Barbra Streisand decided that she wanted those photos taken down. So she starts going after these people really hard, right? Threatening them with lawsuits and legal bills and prosecution, etc. Well, her doing that attracted more attention to the photos, which caused more people to share the photos, which caused this issue that was a minor annoyance at the time to become huge, right? For a small number of people to see these photos, to now many, many more people to see these photos than likely otherwise would have. And it's now called the Streisand effect, right? This idea in literal terms that the thing that you resist may persist and may actually magnify, right? So we want to be very careful here. In my view, my humble opinion here, it's not an all or nothing. When I was a kid, my parents correctly recognized the damaging effects of sugar, of candies, of junk food. So in essence, they tried to keep us from getting hooked on the stuff with a sort of ban on junk food, right? Just don't eat it ever. And just like the smartphones and social media of today, there were differing opinions on what constituted, quote, healthy versus unhealthy. But as soon as I made my own money, right, around the age of 13 when I had my first job, and I had some of the chances and opportunities to make my own decisions, I just went nuts, right? I went nuts on sugar, on candy. I never developed the skills of balance because I had never practiced. And it took me literally decades to recognize that pattern of damage and kick the new and terrible habit that I had developed in my teens and 20s. Sally Fallon Morell of the Weston A. Price Foundation has this idea that we should be careful to out and out ban foods from our existence. And she says something to the effect of puritanical thinking on food leads to pornographic decisions on food, right? Again, right? That which you resist persists and in some cases magnifies, right? I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but you get the point. You could look at attitudes towards drinking in the United States versus Europe in a similar way. In Europe, it's much more common for kids to grow up, to see adults drink maybe a glass or wine with dinner, not drinking to go get drunk, like get smashed or anything like that. And they experience drinking small amounts of alcohol at a much younger age, typically with family, and typically at dinner, just a little bit of wine. In the US, it tends to be all at once, typically in college or maybe even in high school, not around family, not around people that are going to help you monitor and find balance, but around peers, people who might actually be egging you on, encouraging you to take it past the point of safety and for the purpose of getting drunk. Much, much more dangerous in my view. And I'm not the only person who has this opinion. What I ultimately want for my family is balance, the ability to harness and use the magnificent power of these devices without being swallowed whole. So rather than acting as if this world doesn't exist, only to have it come crashing down on their heads as teenagers, my wife and I have started this process young. Okay, we've started thinking about this and anticipating and trying to come up with a plan, an imperfect plan, okay, but a plan on how we can shepherd them into this experience, hopefully in a way that enables them to find some balance. What does this mean in practice? I will paint a picture for you. Okay, not of perfection, very much a messy work in progress, but some specifics on what we've done and how we've tried to approach the subject. Okay, so you know all that talk about balance, about nuance, conversation, judgment. Well, before the age of 2, just throw that out the window, okay? It's just ban, baby, ban, all right? That's the name of the game here. Now, I know that this may be difficult. Screens are fun, they are incredibly convenient, and they will keep a toddler pacified for hours. Okay, this is no small feat. And for most parents, between other kids, school, work, meals, lack of sleep, and more, another hour or two a day in which their little one is safe, occupied, and entertained, that is a godsend. Okay, true miracle. I completely get it. I've been there. And if this for you is just a non starter at this point, or if that ship has already sailed, all good. Okay, don't worry about it. Much, much more to come. So just sit tight for now. But if you are here, or if you will be here, I'm going to be very direct about something. If you can do this, and I acknowledge this will not be easy, you will look back on it as one of the very best decisions that you made as a parent. Okay, trust me. I am speaking from experience, and I am speaking the truth here. This is an investment that you are going to make in your child's brain, in their relationship with you and with others. And it is going to pay massive, massive dividends in the future. There is a reason why Jonathan Haidt, why organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics, and large numbers of health organizations around the world have started to recommend no screens before the age of 2. Okay, and it's not because they're trying to take away something that's incredibly fun, enjoyable, gives parents some time back in their day. It has to do with attention span. There are a couple of books that have really influenced my thinking around being a parent. And one of them is called Simplicity Parenting. Okay, it's been a couple years since I read this book. But the idea here is that children, particularly young children, get overstimulated much easier than most adults realize. Okay, so there's, what we might look at as just a normal experience in a day, right? Even think of the real world, like going to the beach, seeing new people, visiting friends, having a puppy come lick their face. All of these things for adults are stimulating, enjoyable, but for children, particularly young children, children under the age of 2 or toddlers, these experiences are overstimulating. And when you take screens, particularly the sorts of entertainment and even child entertainment. I was going to say the sorts of entertainment that children are exposed to. But the kinds of entertainment coming from the digital world, this is hyperstimulating, okay? Overstimulating. And the effect that this has over time, in short, we're not going to go deep on this right now, is that it hijacks the child's attention span. Okay, I consumed some of this content. I exposed myself to a lot of these arguments, books like Simplicity Parenting, Janet Lansbury, Toddler Discipline Without Shame. But not just that, it's also schools like Waldorf, like Montessori. I read many of those books as well, from thinkers and practitioners of those approaches. And they all have the same theme in common, which is to very, very much, particularly at young ages, limit or out and out ban the use of screens before the age of 2, right? Especially for toddlers and young people. And as I said, I completely get it. Okay, we've seen how a toddler that's, melting down in a restaurant, you hand them a phone and it immediately stops. Okay, you see how if you've got an hour, you got to take a call, or you need something to get done quickly, you can hand them an iPad, and it's almost like an inexpensive, almost free babysitter, right? Just occupies them. They get completely absorbed in it. But this is not a good thing. Okay, there's a lot of information that's coming out now. People like even Dr. Huberman, I believe, have talked about this, that even the eyeball of a young developing child, they're not experiencing what we would describe as entertainment the same way that an adult would. And that this does fundamentally alter the brain in a way that makes concentration and focus and long attention spans, things that, again, are like this meta skill, not a specific skill, but this thing that's going to help them in whatever they do, right? Maybe even developing screens, right? At some point in the future. But the ability to concentrate, to focus, and to pay attention, that is the thing that screens hijack, particularly for young children. So to me, this is incredibly important. And so many of the parents that I've talked to, that I've had these sorts of conversations with, those that have done this, that have tried to stick with it, by and large, they're very grateful that they did. And the benefits, again, come in the form of higher attention spans, longer attention spans, better ability to socialize. These are very, very valuable things. So if there is any way that you can push the use of screens, of iPads, movies, cartoons, all that, to after the age of 2, do it. Okay, it will be worth it. You will thank yourself, and maybe even me, later that you did. So one point that Haidt emphasizes, and I completely agree with, is this idea of less frequent but better screen experiences. And to me, I really think this is part of the answer. There are many, many ways in which the entertainment of a modern digital world can be experienced. And to me, the best ways are ones that are pro-social, that bring people together, that bring families and friends together in a positive way. Okay. And when I was thinking about how to make this point, for some reason, s'mores popped into my head, right? The graham cracker, the marshmallow, and the melted chocolate. Now, it probably comes as no surprise that s'mores are not high up on my list of foods that I want my kids eating all the time, right? They're ultra processed graham crackers for the most part, high fructose corn syrup, gelatin, right? That's even before you get to the loads and loads of sugar, right? Pretty much at every layer of that cracker. So from a health perspective, this is a hard pass, right? Not high up there on my list of things that I want my kids to be consuming. But every year, my family, as in my extended family, holds a family reunion in upstate New York. And I come from a big family. Right? I'm one of 6. My dad's one of 13. My mom's one of 12. Okay. So big families. And it becomes this multi-day, multi-generation, just family reunion, just unbelievable, great time. Kids running around, lots of time outside, playing with their cousins, catching up with and seeing people that you maybe haven't seen for months or even years. And I think it's one evening, although it might be more than one evening, to be honest. We do a bonfire. We do a bonfire with s'mores and with singing. And it is magical, okay? Magical. And do I let my kids participate? Have some s'mores with their cousins? Absolutely. Okay, absolutely. I even let them make one for me because they love it that much and they remember it for the entire year. And it's one of the highlights of their trips. As I've said, it is a magical time from the glow of the campfire to the thrill of a young child cooking their own thing over an open flame. Okay, the warm, gooey, chocolatey crunch of a s'more. It is an experience that I am very grateful for them to have. Right? I've not only just accepted, even though I know that the impacts to their health, yeah, that's not great. But we're talking about a relatively small harm infrequently. And on the other side of the spectrum, on the other side of the scale, if you will, is this massively pro-social, pro-family, just vivid, magical experience that I am incredibly grateful for my kids to have. Now, let's take this a little further. And I don't even know if this is still around. But when I was a kid, there was a candy bar, and I had to look this up, but Hershey's made it, called S'mores. And it was a chocolate bar with marshmallow and graham cracker center, right? Like a s'more. And from a taste perspective, is this similar? Yeah, probably. But are we under any illusion that the experience of the bonfire surrounded by family and friends and singing and love is anywhere near the experience of opening a s'mores candy bar, sitting alone and distractedly eating one while staring at a phone? That's not even close. And that dichotomy, that illustrates my point. And that is what I'm going for fundamentally. That's what we're going for. My wife and I, my family, with screens. Less frequent, but better. And I would add, ideally, pro-social. The first movie that our kids watched was on Christmas Day a few years ago. We don't have a TV in the house. I know for a lot of people that, again, is a non-starter, but, it works for us. But that year, we bought a projector and a screen. It was one of the kids' Christmas gifts. We opened it on Christmas Day. And that year, and every year since, we make, on Christmas Day, homemade sourdough pizza, and we watch a movie. And by now, it's become a ritual, right? It's a tradition. It's something that takes hours when you think about the getting of the ingredients to the homemade crust, to prepping everything, to picking the movie, all that. But the kids look forward to it, and they are involved in every step of it. And of course, they absolutely love it, right? Because it's infrequent. This isn't something that they get to do all the time. So they really, really appreciate it. And of course, what I appreciate about it is that it brings us together. Again, less frequent, but better. They don't get to watch movies all the time. And obviously, when they do here, they really enjoy it. And if this was something that they got to do every day, obviously they would appreciate it much, much less. I'll give you one more. We don't have video games in the house, okay? I just mentioned that we don't have a TV, so no surprise, we don't have video games in the house either. And by the way, I'm teeing this up, and it probably sounds like everything is super lame in our house. And I don't know, maybe for some people it is, but we're going to get into the adventure side soon. So bear with me if you're thinking, man, I would not want to be in this household. Maybe it wouldn't be for you. But we'll get to some of the adventure stuff later. And so I guess I'll just say withhold judgment for now. Okay, so we don't have video games in our house. I didn't grow up gaming. My wife didn't grow up gaming. Just not really our thing, okay? But once a month, we have a homeschool meetup for roller skating, right? Just one of these local, old school roller skating rinks in our town. And this place, it has an arcade, right? The kind that you had as a kid. And on that day, do I let them play video games with their friends? Of course. Right? Not only that, I actually encourage it. We even pay for the cards so that many of the other kids get to play, right? Because some of the other parents, it's just not a priority for them. Totally get it. But for us, this is a priority. And so I'm willing to spend the extra money so that my kids get to play video games, not just the experience of the video games, but the pro-social experience with their friends. And there is something magical about the arcade, right? Even for the kids that have gaming systems at home, they all want to play. Why? I'm not exactly sure, but there's something about the pro-social, less frequent, but better experience that this offers. And we are very, very grateful for it. Now, these are just two examples, but this illustrates the macro point that I'm trying to make here, right? We're past the age of 2. Our kids are aware of screens. At this point, they are using screens. for entertainment, for connection with friends on a very limited basis, for photos, and even to assist with creating artwork or working out. My wife has a Peloton bike. We have the app, all that. And the kids, I don't know, maybe once, twice a week, something like that, they'll use the iPad to do a Peloton yoga class. They love it. So the screens are creeping in. No social media at this point, no doom scrolling, no just flipping through things because you're bored. We're not there, and hopefully won't be there for a while. But now we're at the phase that we're hoping to enable them to experience and for us to model the balance, to give them some exposure, to highlight the use cases in which screens can be helpful and the ones which screens can be harmful in a very age-appropriate manner, right? Now, some are probably thinking at this point, well, what about school? And that is an important question. If you're new to this channel, well, we do homeschool our kids. So yes, that is an important disclaimer, and in this case, an advantage in shaping our children's experience with screens. I completely get that homeschooling is not right for everyone, and it's not even an option for every family. So never any judgment, of course, coming from me or from my perspective. This is certainly not an all or nothing situation. But hypothetically, if my situation were a bit different and my kids weren't homeschooled, right, which we actually did consider when they were very young, what would I do? Well, first, I'd try to get my kids into a school, whether public or private, that is phone free, and ideally one in which screens are not part of the curriculum, right? And I know this may sound completely nuts to some people, but again, schools like Waldorf, Montessori, and many of the very expensive private schools are starting to recognize that screens are not helping children. Okay, they are holding them back. If any of these are an option, that would be my first choice. Right? A couple years ago, I read an article about the number of Silicon Valley executives that send their kids to schools like Waldorf that don't allow their children to use screens because they know the dangers. Okay, they've seen it. They know the risks. Jeff Bezos, he talks about one of the things that really helped him as somebody thinking about systems and computers and stuff was working on his grandparents' farm. Okay, like doing all the stuff from fixing tractors to, sewing up cattle that had been injured and stringing barbed wire fences, right? All things in the real world, right? So there is this idea that, well, if my children don't use screens when they're younger, maybe they're going to get left behind in a world in which screens dominate. And everything that I've seen from that perspective, the opposite is true. Okay. And again, like many of the people that are most familiar, the smartest and the brightest software engineers and people that are heavily involved in the actual development of the tech, they don't want their kids anywhere near them. And there's a reason for that. Okay. Not because they think these things are inherently bad, but because they know what the impacts are to the developing young mind. Okay. So my point and Height's point is that this is going mainstream. Many schools, teachers, and administrators can see that these devices have done very little for the students. Okay. And they've been a massive distraction at the best. But let's go a step further. Let's say that I really don't have a choice here, right? For whatever reason, I just have to send my kids to a school with no restrictions on smartphone. Maybe it's a local public school, and maybe I'm not in a position to try to rally change on sort of that level. Well, what would I do then? Well, in that case, let's consider that we really have two levers here. Right? First, I think about the lever of limitation. Now, this is going to be a more limited tool because, again, we're talking about a situation where my kids are away from home. They're away from sort of my physical influence over the environment for many hours a day. But that limitation of lever is still important, or that lever of limitation, excuse me, is still important, right? So limiting the unfettered, unhelpful, and in many cases, just unlimited access of the most harmful aspects of social media and smartphones. And then on the other side, right, the other lever, we have enabling and encouraging risk and excitement and activity in the real world, right? So we're going to talk about both, right? So we've got the lever of limitation and the lever of adventure and excitement in the real world. And we want to be thinking about both. In this case, we're relying much less on our shaping of the environment, say in a school setting, and much more on the child's decision making when they're not around us. All right. So, this is why all the stuff that we do at home, the modeling, the conversations, this is why it matters. Because every child's going to get here. The point where they are at decision making when we're not around, right? Your kids may already be there. And this is a big ask, right? Because peer pressure can be potentially very, very strong, right? We all get it. So for me, in addition to good habits, right, that hopefully we established when a child is younger, to good modeling that hopefully we are doing when we're at the house, when our children are around, we're not constantly on our phones, the environment in the house and away from school, conversation is incredibly important. Now, there are many ways to have these sorts of conversations, but I have a massive, just massive personal bias towards discussing things in terms of pros and cons. Honestly, okay? Honestly discussing things in terms of pros and cons and the why. Again, all back to this theme of judgment. If we are going to rely on our children's judgment, and we all will sooner or later, then we really want to take strides to help inform and develop that judgment. And finding a way to discuss these topics in an open, helpful, and an age-appropriate manner, well, that is the job, isn't it? And of course, we have to keep in mind, and this is as much a reminder to me as it is to anyone, okay? I'm certainly guilty of this as well. Making mistakes is part of that process. If the first time that your kid messes up on something, we respond with punishments or with, how could you? There will be a huge incentive to hide, right? And we don't want that. Again, because this is practice for the teenage years, right? We're building for the teenage years. We want a strong relationship and a solid home base when that time period comes, right? Whatever could go wrong at age 8 is likely going to be very mild compared to what might go wrong at age 16. So trust is huge. Open conversation is huge. Honesty is huge. And forgiveness, of course, is massive. It's huge. And while we've zeroed in on some unique risks and dangers with smartphones and social media, there are a ton of things that kids are going to face which are kind of like this, right? Ranging from foods that you probably would prefer that they not eat to experimenting with drugs. The only answer in the long run, in my humble opinion, it's not out and out limitation, right? There's going to come a point in time where that can't work. It's judgment. So we want to keep that end goal in mind, or at least that's my 2 cents. So let's talk about the other side of the scale, if you will. Adventure in the real world. Because we've talked a lot about the limitations of screens, but that's only one side of the equation. Maybe more important is the aspect of overprotection and safetyism in the real world. Simply allowing the real world to do what it does best, bring real challenge, real risk, and real thrills, and of course, real connection with friends and peers in the real world, right? That is the point here. Now, you may be thinking, but I've seen the scrolling, I've seen the blank stares, the complete absorption into whatever is behind the glow of the screen. What possibly compete with that in the real world? Well, a lot, actually. What is a first-person shooter game compared to the rush of paintball, airsoft, or a water balloon fight? What is a like or a comment or a share compared to the hi there from a cute girl or cute boy at the mall? What is watching a YouTube video of a kid unboxing a toy compared to the thrill of harvesting the pepper from your first garden that you grew as a kid? When the real world is given a chance, by and large, the virtual world just doesn't compare. But that does mean something important. There are going to be times, maybe even a lot of them, when we have to accept the dirty, right? We have to accept the inconvenient. We have to accept hurt or crying or enraged because it's real. That's a difficult thing for me. It's a difficult thing for many parents, right? But it's so, so important. A few years ago, my wife and I lived in a small beach town in Southern California. We had a nice house. It's a good town, nice small group of friends. Honestly, just no real complaints, right? Life was good. But here's the thing. We both could feel that there was more that we wanted to experience. My wife had wanted to get into horses from the time she was young. And the thought of land and space, right, to grow food, to let the dogs roam and run around, a place where the kids could get dirty and ride go-karts and dirt bikes and just all that was also just very enticing to me, right? It sounded perfect. So long story short, we decided to go for it. We found some land in Florida. We literally packed up a Sprinter van and we just embarked on this new adventure. Kids were very young at this point, like 1 and 3. And that adventure, which we are still living, which we are slowly unfolding now, has been one of the most challenging, heartbreaking, but also one of the best things that we could have asked for, right? Starting from a nearly 40-hour road trip across the country with no screens, literally just music on Pandora, learning to come off of and eventually begin to ride horses, getting sheep to graze the property, to cut down on mowing, and learning what life with land is all about. Now, we've had many adventures at this point in time, much real risk, much real consequence in the real world. But I want to tell you a little story about the sheep to illustrate my point. Now, when we started, we essentially knew nothing about sheep. Okay, we knew that they did eat grass, and we knew that they were a much appreciated snack for the many coyotes that we have in the area. So we knew that we needed some ability to keep them safe. Our idea was to just kind of keep them out on pasture, keep it as natural as possible, and minimal sort of the symbiotic relation between the sheep that would help us graze the land, keep the mowing at bay. They'd help us fertilize, right? And in return, they'd get some shelter, they'd get some protection, they'd get some food, right? And then that would be good enough for us. So it'd be a good symbiotic relation, right? Sort of inspired by people like Joel Salatin, right? Building these little mini ecosystems. So we got these sheep, but like I said, we needed a way to protect them, and that led us to donkeys. Because donkeys, despite their image as being sort of these sad, droopy, Eeyore-like characters, they're actually pretty badass, okay? And unlike dogs, when you put them with sheep, they just eat what the sheep eat. So they're a really, really good addition to a flock. They're used for livestock protection all over the world, that you can see in videos of donkeys like beating up hyenas, protecting livestock in Africa. And they have just like this natural, ingrained, visceral reaction against canines. So for coyotes, donkeys can be incredibly effective. So we bought 2. Story for another day, but it turns out it was buy 2, get the third free, and we just didn't know it. When we found out about a year later that one of our 2 female donkeys gave birth to another one without any exposure to males. So in case you didn't know, and we didn't, a donkey has a very, very long gestation period. But the point is that the donkeys for a long time and the sheep, everything was great, right? Donkeys sort of did their thing. They protected the sheep. They got some extra food. They got some pets. They got some love. And all was right in the world for a few months, right? Until it wasn't. I showed up one morning to discover that we were missing a sheep. And when I found her, it was not pretty, okay? Something had definitely gotten to her. And it was odd to me, again, we're still starting here, so I'm not like a deep expert on this, but none of the other animals had a mark on them. So that struck me as odd. Not to get graphic here, but the nature of the kill struck me as odd. Like the rib cage was completely ripped open. And while I didn't have a lot of experience with coyotes, I had experience with dogs, and I've seen dogs eat, and it's incredibly messy. Right? So I just sort of figured that the scene would look quite a bit different if it were a pack of coyotes. Like there'd be more of a struggle. Some of the other animals may have been nipped, maybe had been bit, something to do with the donkeys. And none of that, just one seemed to have been picked off sort of surgically. A few weeks later, we lose 2 of them. Okay, this happens on the same day. I just got a call from one of my neighbors. He said, hey, you got about 60 buzzards on your property. I think one of your sheep's been taken. And sure enough, one of the sheep was gone. And I had messaged them the day before because they've got cows. And I just said, hey, keep an eye out. There might be some coyotes in the area. But again, the circumstances were odd. One looked very similar to the first one, although the buzzards had gotten to her. So I didn't get a good idea as to what the initial kill looked like. But the other one, like literally not a mark on him, dead, but no wounds, nothing visible. And sheep can startle easily. They can kind of go into shock easily. So I'm thinking maybe there was some running and maybe this one just got stressed and just keeled over. And then, I don't know, coyotes got scared and ran away. I'm not 100% sure what happened, but it was odd. Okay. But now I'm starting to think, okay, there is something here. I don't know what it is. This clearly isn't a one-off. I'm not sure why the donkeys aren't sort of doing the job here, why the job has stopped. But we got to do something, and I can't let it happen again. And to be honest with you, I'm taking this very personally. Okay, I'm a huge animal lover, and this was hitting hard, right? It's hitting hard not only because of the impact on animals that you care about, but also because I just felt very much like I was failing at this. Okay, a feeling all of us can relate to. Like, I wasn't the sort of the hardened shepherd that was thinking about this in terms of, the economics of it. All right. I was thinking about it in terms of what this reflected, what this meant for me, for my family, for my kids. And obviously, when you've got kids involved and they love these animals, right? They're more like pets than they are like livestock. Them coming to terms with this aspect of nature, right? This life and death aspect of nature. Well, they're very young, right? And it's hitting them hard too. So I just got to a point where I didn't know what the answer was, but I just knew I couldn't lose any more sheep. So I thought about it. I cried about it. I was just sitting there trying to figure out, like, what can I do? How can I make this happen? Do I build a barn? Do I move them? Do I pen them? Like, what's the right answer here? And I was compressed, right? Because I felt like at any moment, whatever this predator was could strike again. And I didn't want one of the donkeys to get taken. How do I solve for this? And I just decided I was going to have to camp on the land, right? I was just going to have to stay with the flock, old school shepherd style, until I could figure out, right? Until I could either build a pen or find some other answer. Was there a hole in the fence, right? Whatever it was. So I tell the kids, I tell my wife, I say, hey, this is going on. It's happened. I gotta just spend the night on the land. And the kids they were so sad. They were like, no, Daddy, they're never away. I would never spend a day away from my kids. And they're so sad. They're so upset about it. And I started thinking, I've got this 4-door Jeep Wrangler. And they're like, but how are you going to be okay? Where are you going to sleep? It was really cute. And finally I say, I bet we could figure out a way for you guys to sleep on the land with me if you want. I mean, I'm going to be just sort of following the flock around, getting a little bit of shut eye here or there, but I could put a couple of sleeping bags in the back of the Jeep, fold down all the chairs, and you guys could just sleep in the back. And I have never seen kids so excited and so happy to be going on this adventure, right? We've got this unknown predator. We've got land. We've got darkness. We've got sleeping bags, which of course they had to be renamed the sheeping bags, right? And they just loved it. Okay, they just loved it. This thing that started with this incredible tragedy in the real world, the kinds of emotions and feelings and sadness and hurt that you never want to see your kids going through as a parent, but you also understand is necessary, right? It's the necessary resistance. It's the necessary experience that they need in order to become, not just tough and strong in the real world, but also just to just have perspective, to be actualized in the real world, right? I don't even know what the right word is for it. But this little adventure that we went on, this multi-day adventure, while we could think and figure out, and then eventually start building a pen that would keep the sheep safe, it was like the highlight of their lives, okay? It went from this incredible tragedy to this unbelievable adventure that they just absolutely loved, okay? So when we're talking about the real world, when we're talking about real consequences, real adventure, obviously it's not all going to go well. They're going to be messy things. They're going to be harmful things. They're going to be hurtful things, but they're not all bad. And coming out of it can be some incredibly positive experiences. Now, is this what I'm talking about all the time? No. Many experiences, much of the real risk, much of the real feeling, the real adventure that I'm talking about are much smaller than this. Okay. I am talking about things like riding a bike. I'm talking about things like roller skating or learning to swim or, again, water balloon fights or playing paintball with friends. All of these things are incredibly exciting, incredibly enticing, pro-social, and in the real world. And these are the sorts of things that I believe really are the answer, really are the antidote to the screens, the smartphone, and eventually the social media that they will experience. If the real world is given a shot, it just doesn't compare. It just doesn't. And maybe some of the things that I've described, they're not for you, right? Maybe paintball, you're like, I don't want my kid to get hurt. Maybe, you don't have access to sheep. Okay, fair enough. Most people don't. There's no backyard chickens. Okay, I get it. You don't want a garden, fine. Right? But there's so many, many more things that could be done. Violin, right? Our kids take and play violin. They started doing like this, what is it, aerial silks. And I guess like acrobatics would be the thing, right? They have horses, so they ride horses. And I promise you, I'm not like training my kids to be like Ringling Brothers circus, acts or something. Like this is just things that they've gravitated towards, things that they like. But things like chess, things like board games, these are all things that involve real risk, real feelings, can be done pro-socially, and are hugely, hugely important. Right? I'm banging a drum here, but that's just my view on it. The last thing, and this, I'll be frank, is something that we are working to build more into our lives. I've mentioned a lot of things that are structured, right? They're soccer, it's, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, it's swimming, it's, those sorts of things. But another key aspect of this is unstructured time, unstructured play. And ideally, some of this unstructured play away from parents. Again, like, you could say that me as a homeschooling parent, maybe this is more important for me that my children are given access to unstructured play. But this is also hugely important for children who go to school, right? Because they are in such a structured environment for many, many hours a day. And then they have homework. And then the parents are tired. The ability for kids to just meet up and to do, I am sure, many of the things that we did as children and our parents did as children, to just be allowed to be bored, to come up with some game, to come up with some project to build. These are hugely important. If you are a homeschooling parent, there are, these sorts of meetups that exist all over the place, right? We're a part of a couple of different groups where this is the case. And many of them, you don't need to be a homeschooling parent in order for your kid to participate. So for me, this idea of getting together with friends, having this unstructured time, right? There's another book, is it Free to Learn? I think is by Peter Gray. And he talks a lot about this. Jonathan Haidt mentions him in the book. And this is hugely important for kids to develop this ability to negotiate conflict between one another, but also to just, again, experience the real world and experience it in a way that is on a child level, right? As parents, as adults, we're just so biased because we've seen a lot of this stuff. But for them, it's so new and it's so magical. And I always love when one of my kids gets to experience something that, yeah, sure, I've experienced too, but they experienced it for the first time. And the glow when they're telling me about it, they're giving me all the rundown, the play-by-play of how it happened, of what happened. It's just so important. And again, are the kids sometimes going to get in arguments? Of course. Are there going to be mistakes? Are kids going to get hurt sometimes? Absolutely. Right. But again, these levers, right? Think about these levers. Every time that something like that undesirable happens in the real world, let's remember what the counterpoint is. The counterpoint is that if we don't allow that, if we don't accept that as part and parcel of this experience, then all we're left with is the screens, is the virtual world. And that is a trade-off that in the long run really isn't worth it. I'll give you another one. Entrepreneurship. Turns out kids like making money. Okay, no surprise there. But over the past year, our kids, probably age 5 and 7, something like that, we found a group where they can participate in an entrepreneurship group. And it's something like once a month. They meet up at like a farmer's market, a craft fair. I think they're literally all over the country. And your kid can choose something to make. They can choose something as like a little mini service, depending on what the location is. And our kids absolutely love it. I mean, all of the skills, all of the attributes, all the desirable things that you would like to see in your kids, from, being able to interact with people, following through with things, all of those skills can be practiced, developed, and honed at things like an entrepreneurship club, right? And it's safe. The parents are around, other kids are around, right? It's not, necessarily going door to door and attempting to wash cars or something like that. There's some safety there. There's some structure, but there also is a lot of autonomy, and there's the possibility of success, right? Monetary success, but also failure, right? Sometimes people don't like what you're selling. Sometimes one kid sells more than you do. Sometimes, you sell somebody something and it breaks and they don't like it, right? There's all kinds of things that can be learned and experienced. And again, this is the real world is, obviously the common theme here. And as we're talking, I'm just realizing I never actually finished what happened with the sheep, right? You may be wondering what happened with the sheep. Well, it turns out it wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a pack of coyotes. It turns out that it was a Florida panther. And I'm going to have to save the full story for probably a later episode. But I started to get a little bit suspicious. And so much so that I reached out to the police. And it turns out I wasn't alone in this thinking. I had a neighbor who I'd subsequently met, didn't know at the time, also had sheep. And he had a bunch picked off as well. And he had more experience than me. And he thought the same thing, that it just looked odd. Like it didn't look like coyotes, and he wasn't quite sure what it was. Well, after I shared these photos and he shared the photos, those photos were sent to a Florida biologist that works with the police and works with the state. And based on the tracking and based on the images from the kill, they said that it was likely a Florida panther with cubs. So the mom will actually teach the cubs how to hunt. And you're thinking, and I'm thinking, like, well, how big could these cubs be? Well, they stay with the mom until they're like 2 years old, right? So these are massive animals, right? Potentially 150, 180 pounds. So big animals. That being said, after we spent probably 10 days, 12 days, something like that on the land, while we were in the process of figuring out, planning, determining how we were going to do this, building a pen. Actually, again, shout out to Joel Salatin. We built a mobile sheep pen that was modeled on his chicken tractor idea, right? So this pen has a couple of hooks on it, and we're able to just move this thing day by day, right? So the manure doesn't pile up, so that we're able to, keep it convenient, keep it very minimalistic, keep the parasite load down, etc. And that's worked out phenomenally well. Since we've had that pen and we've had a roof on it, that sort of thing, we haven't lost another sheep. So we've been very, very grateful for that. And again, every aspect of that adventure, from the initial heartbreak to the confusion, to the problem solving, to the ultimate solution, at least the solution that's worked really well for us right now, the kids got to be a part of. And again, I'm super, super grateful for that. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap that episode for today. We discussed a lot. I gave you hopefully some more things to think about, a little bit more about sort of my personal experience, how we tend to think about these subjects. Again, this is a little bit of an odd subject for a podcast that's on health and fitness, but I'm starting to really recognize that this is incredibly important. These devices, as I've said, and I will continue to say, are magical. They are powerful. They are incredible. I'm very, very grateful. But they come with some risks and they come with some costs that we should be well aware of. Combine that with just the plug. I've plugged a lot of books. Let me plug the real world. Okay. I'm going to plug the real world as part of these episodes, but the plug to allow and embrace the adventure and the excitement in the real world. That's it for me today. Thank you for the listen. If you have an opportunity, as always, follow, like, subscribe, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you like listening to podcasts. And hey, eventually, maybe even video. I don't know. Been thinking about turning this podcast into a video podcast. We'll have to see if we can pull that off. But that's it for me today. Thank you, and I will see you next time.